On a cold autumn morning in 613, a woman in her late 70s is dragged into a public square in the city of Regent, in the heart of the Frankish kingdom. Her face, once admired for its extraordinary beauty, is now scarred by decades of war, intrigue, and relentless survival. Her silver hair, once golden as the sun, is now shaggy and dirty from months of torture and confinement. This woman, who ruled 3 kingdoms as queen and regent, who set entire armies in motion with a simple command, can now barely stand as the bloodthirsty mob screams insults around her. Her name is Brunhilda, former queen of Austrasia, and on this morning she will face one of the most brutal deaths ever recorded in the history of European monarchs. Her already frail body will be tied by her hair, arms, and legs to 4 wild horses that will set off in opposite directions, tearing her to pieces. Her remains would later be burned in the ashes, scattered to the winds in an attempt to completely erase her existence. But what brought this powerful queen to such a horrific end? As a Visigothic princess from distant Spain, she became the most feared, hated, and paradoxically, most influential figure in the medieval Frankish world. To understand Brunhilde's bloody fate, we must go back more than 50 years to her birth in the Visigothic kingdom of Hispania, present-day Spain, around 543. The daughter of King Athanagild and Queen Goswintha, Brunhild was born into a world on the brink of collapse. The Western Roman Empire had officially fallen just a few decades earlier, and Europe was fragmented into rival barbarian kingdoms, fighting for power on a continent where the old order ruled, but a new one had yet to fully emerge. The Visigoths, a Germanic people who had sacked Rome in 410, now ruled most of the Iberian Peninsula. They were Arians, followers of a branch of Christianity considered heretical by Roman Catholics, which placed them in constant religious tension with their Frankish neighbors, who had adopted Catholicism under King Clovis in the early 6th century. Young Brunhilda received an exceptional education for a woman of her time. She was fluent in Latin, Gothic, and later the lingua franca. She was also well educated in the arts of rhetoric, mathematics, and classical literature. Her contemporaries described her as extraordinarily beautiful, with golden hair and piercing eyes. But it was her keen intelligence and fierce ambition that would distinguish her throughout her life. In 567, at age 24, Brunhilda became the centerpiece of a political alliance when her father married her to Sigibert I, King of Austrasia, the eastern portion of the Frankish kingdom. This marriage was part of a diplomatic effort to strengthen ties between the Visigoths and Franks, with her sister Goswintha betrothed to Sigibert's brother Chilperic, King of Neustria. Prior to these marriages, the Merovingian brothers, Sigibert, Chilperic, and Guntram, were already engaged in a bitter rivalry. Sons of the powerful King Clovis I, they had divided the Frankish kingdom after his death, establishing a pattern of dynastic conflict that would dominate Frankish politics for generations. Sigibert ruled Austrasia, Chilperic, Neustria, Burgundy. When Brunhild arrived at Sigibert's court in Metz, she immediately broke with tradition by converting to Catholicism, abandoning the Arianism of her family. This astute move guaranteed her the support of the powerful Frankish clergy and helped legitimize her in the eyes of the people. Impressed by her beauty, intelligence, and strategic conversion, Sigbert quickly fell in love with his new queen. Unlike many Frankish kings who maintained several concubines, Sigbert remained monogamous throughout his life, a testament to the power Brunhild wielded over him. Meanwhile, in the neighboring kingdom of Neustria, a storm was brewing over Fredegund, a servant of humble origins who had become King Chilperic's lover. When Goswintha, Brunhild's sister, arrived for her marriage to Chilperic, Fredegund was temporarily sidelined. However, just months after the wedding, Goswintha was found strangled in her bed, and Chilperic quickly elevated Fredegund to the status of queen. Goswintha's murder ignited in Brunhild a thirst for revenge that would define the rest of her life. She convinced her husband, Sigibert, to declare war against Chilperic, initiating a conflict that would last for decades and transcend generations. This event also marked the beginning of the legendary rivalry between Brunhild and Fredegund, two exceptionally powerful and ruthless queens. each willing to use any means possible to protect her interests and those of her children. Initially, Sigebert gained the upper hand in the war against his brother. By 575, his forces cornered Chilperic at Tournai, and Sigebert was on the verge of being proclaimed king of all the Frankish territories. But at the moment of his triumph, two assassins sent by Fredegund accosted him and stabbed him with poisoned knives. Sigebert died instantly, leaving Brunhild at the age of 32, a widow in hostile territory, surrounded by enemies, with a son barely 5 years old, the young Childebert. Here, for the first time, we see the remarkable resilience and political astuteness that would define Brunhild. Rather than flee or accept defeat, she quickly arranged for her son Childebert to escape, where he was proclaimed king, and began to build a network of support among the Austrasian nobles. She herself was captured and exiled to Rouen, but even in captivity her keen intellect did not desert her. During her brief exile, Brunhild attracted the attention of Merovech, Chilperic's son from a previous marriage, who fell in love with her despite the age difference. Brunhild was 32 and Merovech barely 20, and the fact that she was his aunt-in-law. They married in secret. This union represented a direct threat to Chilperic and Fredegund, for it gave Brunhild a potential ally within the feuding family. When Chilperic discovered the marriage, his fury was immense. He marched on Rouen, forcing Brunhild and Merovech to seek asylum in a church. Eventually, Merovech was captured and forcibly tonsured as a monk, while Brunhild managed to escape back to Austrasia. Merovech, considered a traitor by his own father, would eventually commit suicide, or, as many suspect, be murdered on Fredegund's orders. Back in Austrasia, Brunhild faced a new challenge. As a woman and a foreigner, she had no legal right to rule. Officially, her son Childebert was king, but at just 5 years old, he needed a regent. The powerful Austrasian nobles, led by Duke Gogo, initially assumed that role, sidelining Brunhild, but she was patient and cunning, gradually using a combination of strategic alliances, bribery, and, when necessary, eliminating opponents. Brunhild managed to assume control as regent for her son. She demonstrated exceptional talent for governance, reforming the tax system, building roads and fortresses, sponsoring monasteries and schools, and maintaining diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms, including the Byzantine Empire. Her letters to the Byzantine Emperor Maurice and Pope Gregory III reveal a sophisticated political mind and a deep understanding of the complexities of European geopolitics. Gregory, in particular, praised her upright faith and zeal for good works, although, as we shall see, this favorable opinion was not to last. As Childebert grew up, Brunhild carefully educated him in the arts of war and politics. When he came of age, rather than relinquish power, Brunhild remained his chief advisor, effectively co-ruling Austrasia. Together, mother and son established an alliance with Childebert's uncle, King Guntram of Burgundy, who, with no surviving sons, named Childebert as his heir. In 584, Chilperic of Neustria was assassinated, possibly on the orders of his own wife, Fredegund, who feared she was losing her hold on him. With Chilperic dead, Fredegund assumed control of Neustria as regent for her newborn son, Clothar II. The rivalry between the two queens regent intensified, both launching armies against each other in bloody battles that transformed the Frankish kingdom into a permanent war zone. When King Guntram died in 593, Childebert, now 23, inherited Burgundy, uniting it with Austrasia and becoming the most powerful ruler among the Franks. It seemed that Brunhild had finally triumphed over her archenemy. But fortune, that capricious goddess so feared by the ancient Romans, was about to show her cruelest side. In 596, under suspicious circumstances, both Childebert and his young wife died suddenly, most likely from poisoning. Rumors pointed to Fredegund, although some also suspected Austrasian nobles dissatisfied with the growing centralizing power of Childebert and Brunhild. Regardless of who was responsible, Brunhild, now 53, once again found herself in a precarious position with two underage grandsons to protect. Childebert's sons, 10-year-old Theodoric II and 9-year-old Theodoric II, were proclaimed kings of Austrasia and Burgundy, respectively. Brunhild assumed regency of both kingdoms, effectively controlling 2/3 of Frankish territory. By this point, her reputation as a capable ruler had solidified, but so had her image as a ruthless and dangerously powerful woman, a new Jezebel, as some of her detractors called her, referring to the infamous biblical queen. Fredegund died in 597, potentially allowing the long-standing feud between the queens to end. But by then, the political tensions Brunhild faced came primarily from within. The Frankish aristocracy, traditionally accustomed to a high degree of autonomy, resented her attempts to centralize power. Moreover, many questioned the legitimacy of a woman, especially a foreign and now elderly one, wielding so much power. As her grandchildren grew up, Brunhild faced a problem that many regents face: transferring power to their protégés. Theudebert II of Austrasia, in particular, began to resent his grandmother's interference. When he reached adulthood, around 600, he rebelled against her, forcing her to flee to Burgundy, where her other grandson, Theuderic II, still accepted her guidance. The brothers, manipulated by their respective advisors, soon turned against each other. Brunhild, seeing an opportunity to regain her influence in Austrasia, actively encouraged hostility between her grandsons. In 610, she convinced Theuderic to declare war against Theudebert, possibly falsely claiming that Theudebert was, in fact, the son of a gardener, not Theudebert, and therefore illegitimate. The war between the brothers culminated in 612 with Theudebert's defeat. He was captured, along with his infant son. Under pressure from Brunhild, Theudebert ordered his brother to be forcibly tonsured and sent to a monastery, a fate considered more merciful than death. However, soon after, Theudebert was executed, and his son, barely a child, had his skull crushed against a stone on Brunhild's orders. The brutality of this act, even in an era known for its violence, shocked contemporaries and permanently stained Brunhild's reputation. Having eliminated one grandson, Brunhild now ruled through the other, controlling both Austrasia and Burgundy. But fortune had a crueler twist in store. Just weeks after her triumph, Theuderic died suddenly of dysentery, leaving 4 young sons, all still children. At 69, Brunhild found herself once again regent, now for her great-grandsons and with more enemies than ever. Her decision was to name Theuderic's eldest son, Sigebert II, a boy of barely 10, as King of Austrasia and Burgundy, ignoring the other 3 brothers. This decision, which violated the Frankish tradition of dividing the kingdom among all the sons, further alienated the nobility. Meanwhile, across the border, Fredegund's son, Clothar II, had grown up and was ruling Neustria. Raised by his mother to hate Brunhild, and now a man of about 28, he saw in this moment of weakness an opportunity to eliminate his old enemy and reunite the Frankish kingdom under his control. Clothar formed an alliance with leading Austrasian and Burgundian nobles, including the powerful mayor of the palace, Warnachar, who had been publicly humiliated by Brunhild. Together, they marched against the armies still loyal to the old queen. In the decisive battle, Brunhild's forces were betrayed by their own commanders, who defected to Clothar's side. Her great-grandsons were captured. 2 were immediately killed and the 3rd was exiled. As for Brunhild, she attempted to flee but was captured near Lake Neuchâtel in present-day Switzerland. The son of her archenemy now had her in his power, and his revenge would be terrible. For 3 days, Brunhild was tortured and publicly humiliated, riding backward on a camel and paraded throughout the military camp. Clothar personally accused her of having caused the deaths of 10 Frankish kings, an exaggerated accusation, but one that reflected the fear and respect she inspired. In the mock trial that followed, she was found guilty not only of multiple regicides, but also of witchcraft and debauchery, standard accusations against powerful women throughout history. On the morning of October 13, 613, Brunhild faced her execution with the same indomitable strength she had displayed throughout her life. Condemned to the most terrible death her captors could imagine, she was taken to a public square in Rennes. There, before a crowd of soldiers and nobles, the queen who had once ruled most of Gaul was tied by her hair, arms and legs to 4 wild horses. At Clothar's signal, the horses were whipped off in opposite directions. For a moment, they struggled against the knots, and the aging queen's body was suspended in the air, stretched to its limit. Then, with a horrible sound of rending flesh, the horses departed, each taking with them a piece of the once powerful Brunhilda's body. Her still pulsing remains were thrown onto a bonfire and reduced to ashes, which were then scattered to the wind in an attempt to deny her even a grave where her followers could venerate her memory. Thus ended the extraordinary life of Brunhilda of Austrasia, a life that spanned 7 decades and witnessed her rise from foreign princess to de facto ruler of 2/3 of the Frankish kingdom. She outlived a husband, a son, 2 grandchildren, and saw her great-grandsons briefly on the throne before her final fall. Following his victory, Clothar X reunited the Frankish kingdom and ruled for 16 years, implementing reforms that, ironically, drew on many of the policies Brunhild had initiated. The Edict of Paris, which he issued in 614, established greater autonomy for the nobles, the very thing Brunhild had fought against. But it also codified many of the administrative and legal reforms she had introduced. In the years following her death, Brunhild's reputation suffered a systematic campaign of defamation. Chronicles linked to Clothar's court portrayed her as a malevolent, power-hungry, and sexually depraved witch. Bishop Gregory of Tours, who had previously praised her piety and governmental ability, saw his chronicles edited and reinterpreted to emphasize the negative aspects of her character. Yet, even through this negative propaganda, Brunhild's greatness cannot be completely obscured. The surviving documents of her long reign reveal a remarkably effective ruler who kept civilization functioning in an age of chaos. The Roman roads she restored in Gaul were known as Brunhild's roads for over 1,000 years after her death, a lasting testament to her impact on the kingdom's infrastructure. What makes Brunhild's story so fascinating is not just its horrific ending, but the fact that she defied all expectations and limitations imposed on women of her time. In a world dominated by male warriors, she ruled through intelligence, cunning manipulation, and sheer force of will. Her ability to survive and thrive for decades, facing betrayals, defeats, exile, and devastating personal losses, reveals an almost superhuman resilience. Her rivalry with Fredegund, another woman who refused to accept the limitations of her gender and social background, produced one of the most extraordinary conflicts in medieval history. These 2 queens, through the sheer force of their personalities, directed the course of Frankish history for over 4 decades, demonstrating that, even in a deeply patriarchal society, power could be wielded by those determined enough to seize it. Brunhild's brutal death, tied to 4 horses and literally torn to pieces, reflects the profound fear she inspired. No other Frankish monarch ever received such a spectacularly cruel punishment, an indication of the threat she posed not only to Clothar's rule, but to the entire patriarchal order. To eliminate Brunhilda, it wasn't enough to simply kill her. She needed to be completely obliterated, her body destroyed, her ashes scattered, and her memory permanently tainted. Despite all efforts to erase her legacy, Brunhilda of Austrasia remains one of the most powerful and fascinating figures in medieval European history. Her life, marked by ruthless ambition, political cunning, and cruelty when necessary, offers a unique insight into the inner workings of power in early medieval Europe. And her terrible end reminds us of the consequences that often awaited those who dared to challenge the conventions of their time, especially if they were women. As the 4 horses set off in opposite directions, taking the aging queen's limbs with them, a startling chapter in Frankish history closed. Brunhilda of Austrasia, the queen who had so long defied her enemies, finally met an adversary she could not defeat. Time itself, as it eventually emerges, betrays even the most powerful and resilient among us.